for a solution. Obviously, it will take time while the Russians are going to find a key how to crack this nut, but obviously this is going to happen. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but most likely by the end of the year we're going to see completely different configuration of the line of combat contact in this direction. The Ukrainians are trying to slow the Russians down as much as possible, and for these purposes they continue using their newly created weapon, flamethrowers, drones. This is something unique and something interesting that Ukrainians invented. Currently we still haven't seen a Russian analog or something like this. I would like to point your attention that in this video we see that drone is flying above Russian positions, and then we can see a secondary detonation. This is secondary detonation. These are bullets. These are bullets that were burned and activated as a result of FPV drone attacks. So once again, we've been discussing, or is the Russians who are trying to bring the drone down? So a lot of possible things. Anyway, the trenches were completely destroyed, and the Russians were forced to find the other way how to improve their territories and their strongholds. Now let's move further. Let's talk about another Russian breakthrough in the vicinity of Makeivka. The Ukrainian sources published a video how the Russians were attacking the Ukrainian forces with a significant number of armored vehicles and the personnel. Some of the vehicles were damaged and destroyed by the Ukrainians during the Russian attack. Some of them managed to survive. We have another geolocations, and if we go to back to map, we have additional progress on the ground. After the Russians finished this attack, some of the forces were wounded and they were forced to move back towards the mainland, and the Ukrainians were trying to hunt the Russians somewhere on the fields on the Ukrainian side of Zhiribets River. So this video confirms additional Russian progress, and we have adjusted the map in Russian favor. And the Ukrainians are saying that the Russian armored forces have advanced north of Makeivka. The Ukrainian armored forces are transferring additional reserves to the area, which include many volunteers and mercenaries. So the situation is very difficult, but I'll remind you that this is the territory of under responsibilities of the 3rd Assault Brigade Azov. As for the northern Kupiansk direction, we see that the flower of Peshchane continue blooming. We have additional changes on the ground around the village. So currently the Ukrainians still haven't found a solution how to stop the Russians, and the Russians are not in a hurry to move further in the western direction. First they decided to take under control everything around Peshchane to improve their positions, to get more territories, and then they will rush in direction of the river of Oskol, forcing the Ukrainians to fall back. So this is also very interesting direction that is completely covered with the fog of war. There are lots of updates, events, the territories under very heavy fire from the Russian side, from the Russian artillery, but almost nothing interesting changes on the ground. So it's like the war of attrition, and the Ukrainians are suffering losses, but the Ukrainians are forced to bring more and more forces in this area, trying to stabilize the line and not to allow the Russians to break through the situation on the ground. As for the Kursk direction, we have additional icons, additional events. There are very heavy clashes right now. Zelensky is trying to hold their Ukrainian positions in Sudzha direction because he have prepared the plan. He have prepared the plan that he is going to show Biden, and his plan means that Ukraine agrees to ceasefire on some front lines and temporary freeze in plan Zelensky will hand over to Biden, Harris and Trump. Zelensky now wants to put everything on one card and try to achieve a turning point on the battlefield, for which he needs a decision from President Biden, which shows how great the desperation is in Ukraine. There is no point in hoping for any progress here. His plan also contains Ukraine's demand for permission to use Western weapon on targets deep inside the Russian Federation. So lots of things Zelensky wants from Biden, and the most important, he wants to change the course direction for something. Maybe Zelensky wants to change the course direction for let's say stopping attacks from the Russian side of energy facilities. Because the Ukrainians understand that they will not be able, Ukraine will stop exist by the end of the winter of 2024. The country will stop exist because population will leave the country. Everybody understands it. Zelensky understands this as well. He wants to change the territory of Sudzha in exchange for complete absence of any attack from the Russian side on the energy facilities. But on the other hand, Zelensky wants to save the permission and authorization to attack deep inside of territory of Russia and to attack military objects. So he thinks that it's very tricky or something like this, but the Russians don't think that this is very tricky. The Russians began full-scale offensive operation on the western flank of Sudzha direction, trying to take this card from Zelensky's hand and to reduce any chances from his side for any positive negotiations with the United States of America. Today we have additional changes on the ground in Russian favor. According to different mappers, the Russians reached the river. There are very heavy clashes right now in the territory of Lyubimovka, and this is the territory of the turning point. Who wins the battle for Lyubimovka will win a significant part of the battle for Sudzha, because if the Russians are able to move further in the western direction and to take this intersection of the roads between Lyubimovka, Zelený Shlях, and Novoivanovka, and to force the Ukrainians to fall back further to the border, the Russians will be able to cut the Ukrainians that are located in the northern part. And there are still a lot of Ukrainians, there are still a lot of Ukrainians. For example, in this video we can see how the Russians were attacking the abandoned Ukrainian vehicles. Probably they were abandoned a long time ago, and the Russians don't have possibilities to take these vehicles. They decided to destroy them because they were mined. We continue receiving updates from Ukrainian side of how they were FPV droning the Russian forces, which confirms additional changes on the ground from the Russian side. We have lots of updates. There are lots of forces, and the Ukrainians don't have possibilities to retreat, because if they begin retreating process, the entire direction can collapse, and the Russians on the Ukrainian soldier can move even further in the direction of Sudzha. As for the city of Sudzha itself, we continue we start receiving first updates of how the Russians began bombing the city with FAB. So the Russians were trying to avoid this method to bomb the cities of Russian Federation with FAB, but as I understand, the Russians have no choice. They need to, let's say, to prepare Sudzha before possible siege. The Ukrainians will try to hold this territory as long as possible, despite the losses, despite heavy losses the Ukrainians are suffering in this direction. We have a lot of videos with burned and destroyed Ukrainian equipment along the road, artillery systems, vehicles, supply machines that were destroyed as a result of Russian FPV drone attacks. We have a lot of casualties from the Ukrainian side in this area, and they continue suffering them. As for the south eastern direction, the Russian sources reported that they managed to establish complete control over the village of Borky. The Russian soldiers published 2 videos how they were raising the flag, and this video we have Russian soldiers, and they were stating that they took under control the village of Borky, but telling the truth, it's impossible to geolocate these 2 videos. According to these guys, the video was made on the territory of the edge positions of the village of Borky, but based on these trees, it's impossible to geolocate where exactly they were raising the flag. So that's why we continue keeping the village of Borky in the contested area until we get, or until anybody can geolocate the exact position of the Russians with the flag. The Ukrainians understand that they need to hold their positions in Sudzha as long as possible, so that's why they began another suicide operation in direction of Glushkova. And today we have additional updates, but the most important, we have updates that all reports from Ukrainian side that the village of Veselye was captured by the Ukrainians were just speculations and wishful thinkings. In this video we can see Ukrainian attack with United States bomb, and as a result of attack with the United States bomb, the Ukrainians destroyed the school in the village of Veselye. Most likely the school was occupied by the Russian soldiers, but anyway, furthermore, we have additional changes on the ground. According to pro-Russian mappers, the Ukrainians control currently around 50% of Veselye, and the Ukrainians entered the village of Medvezhye. So just probably 50% of the village is already under complete Ukrainian control, but we are not changing the map until we get more reliable confirmations. Anyway, once again, the most very important, Zelensky is waiting for authorization from the United States of America to get permission to attack the Russia deep inside with long-range missiles.